Greetings, Mark Guerringue here, publisher of the Conway Daily Sun, and my guest today is Carleigh. Carleigh, how are you?
I'm great, Mark. How are you?
Good. Carleigh, you are running for the first seat in the 1st Congressional District. Just to remind people, that's Chris Pappas has held that seat for, I think, 4 terms, and so it's a wide open seat.
Yeah.
And so you have we'll talk about your competition a little later, but obviously people aren't going to be very familiar with you from here. So introduce yourself, a little bit about your background.
Absolutely. So my name is Carleigh Barriant, and I am from Hampton, New Hampshire. I serve as the vice chair on the select board there. I'm also a mom of 2 delightful little children who are going back to school next week, as is my husband, who's a public middle school teacher. And in addition to serving on the select board in Hampton, I also teach about the intersections of religion and politics and U.S. history at the Kennedy School of Government. And while I was at Harvard, I also helped unionize the graduate student workers there and helped form the first graduate student worker union at Harvard, UAW Local 5118, and bargained for dependent health care, child care provisions, dental, all sorts of things that helped make life a lot better for the graduate student workers there, and gave me some of the tools that I think will be really useful in this congressional race and down in Washington, D.C.
Your background, you have a PhD in religion and politics, and then you have another degree in religion. Is it religion and theology?
Religion, ethics, and politics.
And ethics.
Yeah.
So what? Why?
Why? Great question. Absolutely. I mean, my whole life I've been fascinated by why people do what they do, why they make the choices, why they believe the things that they do, and I have a sense that people are really hungry for belonging. And I've always been curious about how we decide where and how we belong and what stories we tell ourselves about that kind of belonging. I think also for me, like, my interest in religion stems from being raised Catholic, going to Sunday school, working at the food bank, and just having this sense of justice and solidarity with people who were less fortunate than I was. I also was born in New Jersey and raised there. And I was really young in 7th grade when September 11th happened. And I think for, a kid growing up during that time, there were a lot of questions that I had about religion and people who are different than us and why people were so angry. And, we plunged into this war, and I just remember feeling like there was a lot about religion that I didn't understand in terms of how it impacted the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and also the sense of belonging that a lot of people had in the United States. So when I went to college, I studied that a lot more.
And are you still a lecturer? You're a lecturer at Harvard?
Yeah.
You still do that?
I'm not doing it this year.
Okay.
But yes.
Yeah. And you moved to Hampton in 2016?
Yes.
And why?
Well, my husband went to college in New Hampshire, and we had spent a lot of time here. And when it came time to thinking about where we wanted to settle down and raise a family, we couldn't think of a better place. I mean, Hampton is amazing. It has the ocean and great beaches. It has a really fun community, awesome public library, great public schools. And it was a place where we felt that we could afford to make a life for ourselves. My husband was a middle school teacher then, and I was a graduate student. And there weren't a lot of places where people like us could afford to set down roots, and this was one of the few places where we could. And so we were really grateful to get in when we could, because there are a lot of people who don't have that opportunity now.
And so you're a selectman.
Yes.
You're now currently a selectman?
Yes, I am.
So how do you go from selectman to want to be a congressperson?
Well, I think actually it's my role in the select board that has illustrated for me just how hard things are for so many of the people in our communities. So last year in Hampton, we had a reassessment. The state of New Hampshire requires these every 5 years. And a lot of people's property taxes, including my own, went way up. And for months in the fall, during public comment at our select board meetings, people were coming in and they were telling me their stories. They were saying, I bought a mobile home in the 1980s for like $15,000. I don't own the land that it's on, and it's now valued at $140,000. What am I supposed to do? How do I pay my property taxes, my health care bills, for food, for heating? Which one of those things should I not pay for? And I heard a lot of stories like this of people who are on a fixed income, people who are having a hard time making ends meet. My own daughter, was a first grader last year, and her best friend's family lost their home after her mom was in a horrible accident and lost her job and her health insurance. And I just realized how precarious so many of the people in our communities are. And, you know, in local government, that's kind of where the buck stops. And I realized we don't have the kind of partners in Concord that we need anymore. We don't have the kind of partners in Congress that we need. And we have a federal government and a state government that are continuing to downshift costs onto local communities like mine. And just looking at the budget, I was on the budget committee last year, and recognizing, you know, how much of our taxpayer money go to things like public schools and to pensions and to healthcare for employees, and how much it would be easier for us as a community to keep people in our homes if those costs were shared by the state and federal governments. It made me think that we need a better voice and a partner in Washington.
I mean, one of the things, and if you haven't heard it yet, you know, you're going to hear it, is that if you've only been a New Hampshire citizen for 9 years, you're going to be called an interloper. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I think that I have a lot of hope after all of the welcoming towards immigrant language that I've heard lately, right? Like, I'm not an immigrant at all, but I'm someone who has come to New Hampshire because I believe that this is a place where my voice matters. It's the best place in the world I can think to raise my kids, and I love it here. And I'm choosing, you know, to run for office because I think there's a lot of families whose experiences are like mine, and they want to have themselves better represented down in Washington. Right? People who are struggling with the cost of healthcare, people who understand what it means when our public schools are consistently underfunded, people who believe that they deserve a voice at the table where the decisions are made that affect all of us, regardless of their last name or how many years they've lived in the state.
So major issues, you've gone a few of them, so let me ask it this way. What committees would you like to serve on?
I would love to serve on the House Ethics Committee. As you mentioned, I have a degree in religion, ethics, and politics, and I think, you know, there's a lot to be desired when it comes to the ethical practices of a lot of our people in Congress. Like right now, you know, it's not illegal for Congress people or their spouses to trade individual stocks, right? And we're watching how they are profiting off of insider information that the rest of us don't have access to. And I think that's something that we should be tackling as a country, and I would love to help with that on the Ethics Committee. I also would love to be on the Education and Workforce Committee. They deal with things like early childhood development and early childhood education, as well as IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that's something I care a lot about because it's a piece of legislation that was so important when it was passed, and it ensures that all students in the United States have appropriate education. And it's something that the federal government hasn't been paying its fair share for, and as a result, that cost has been put on our doorstep as taxpayers in places like New Hampshire. And so I think that, you know, on a committee like that, I could help advance the legislation that would actually appropriate the funds to pay for that type of bill and ensure that all of our kids have access to a good education and that we can save property tax money.
Now, you, when you were younger, didn't you work overseas? What did you do overseas?
I did. After I graduated from college, I worked in the Republic of the Marshall Islands for 3.5 years. I was a teacher there, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands is where the United States tested nuclear weapons for 12 years after World War II. And it was actually that work in the Marshall Islands, the teaching that I did there, that led me to go to graduate school and to get a PhD. Because I realized when I got to the Marshall Islands that I'd made it through, you know, almost 20 years in the United States without ever having learned about that history. I had no idea that the United States tested nuclear weapons there after World War II, or that the people there were still struggling with the legacies of US nuclear testing. Things like leukemia and high rates of other types of cancers, miscarriages, and all sorts of health consequences. And I started to ask myself, well, what if me not knowing this history is related to the policy decisions, right? What if the fact that I don't know about this is one of the things that's helping us get away with not giving healthcare to these people and not addressing some of these historical wrongs? And so the work that I did was based on the years that I spent there teaching.
I guess where I was going with that, which is very interesting you did that, is constituent service. Like what role, I mean, Chris Pappas has been, as we said, he was is our congressman for 4 terms, 8 years. So, I mean, we know Chris like, hey, Chris, you know, we see Chris a lot. Yeah. So how do you see yourself as a congressperson and dividing your time between constituent service and the bigger issues that you started to talk about?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, they're all connected. And I think Chris Pappas has done a great job being present in the district. I know that he opened an office in Hampton so that people from our community and surrounding communities can go right into our town hall and find a representative from his team there on certain days of the week. and I think that's awesome. I also appreciate his town halls and like the mobile passport renewal programs and things that he's been doing that help us appreciate just how much what's happening in all of our lives can impact the decisions that are made in Washington when we have a good messenger, right? Someone who's able to convey that in those stories in a way that can have an effect on policy. So I would hope to continue in terms of constituent services, really being present in places throughout the district and listening to people and ensuring that their concerns are heard and that they're addressed.
I mean, with your background, one could say that you're progressive, right? I mean, that's a fair statement.
Sure.
And and Chris Pappas, I mean, he's obviously a Democrat and liberal, but he's definitely tries to be bipartisan.
Yeah.
And you're up against, your two major opponents are going to be Morris Sullivan, who ran not for that position, but has run before. She's well known, and of course, Stephanie Shaheen is well known by virtue of her last name, and they both have credentials. I mean, they've both done a lot. So how do you position yourself politically with them? Are you more left, less left, more moderate? And then how do you compete with them?
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions. I think that in terms of, how do I position myself? I'm progressive insofar as I think we have a lot of progress that we can make in terms of getting people access to health care, addressing the climate crisis, ensuring that we have a government that isn't just stacked in favor of the wealthy and well-connected. And I also think that a lot of the work that I've done in local government, running and winning a seat in a very purple community and governing very successfully there prepares me for Washington, D.C. I hope that people appreciate that, when I come to the decision-making table, I do it with the people in my community in mind and their problems first. I don't come here with my ideology and try to, push a certain type of agenda. I really try to listen to what the problems are that people in my community are facing and to think carefully about how we can address those. And I think that, working in a nonpartisan space like local government really does give you the opportunity to appreciate just how much of what's ailing us right now as a country is stuff that we agree on, right? I imagine myself in Congress being someone who's not hanging out on the sides, but as someone who can really work in the aisle and bring people together to craft the complex policy solutions that we really need right now. Like take immigration. That's a problem in this country, and it's a problem because for decades, generations of Democratic and Republican leaders haven't sat down and crafted the legislation we need to have a secure border and also a safe way for people who are already here to attain legal status. And I think that that's something that we need people who are serious about governing to sit down and work on, rather than kind of just preaching to the choir on either side.
Well, here's sort of an ethics question. I mean, we know that all the stories about ICE going around and scooping up undocumented people, so forth. And, there are stories. There's, blah, blah, blah. But why is it that it hasn't risen to the top yet? Why isn't it hasn't risen to a critical mass where most people care?
I think they do care. I mean, I know that I care a great deal about this, and the people who have been, protesting outside the Stratford County Jail or up in the federal prison in Berlin where there are migrants being held. I think that the people who are protesting outside of the Pease Air Force Base on Portsmouth where migrant deportation flights are occurring on a regular basis. I think a lot of us really care about what's going on because we realize that this is about more than just immigrants, right? This is about more than just the people who have been in our communities for decades, people who are raising their kids here and working alongside us in different kinds of jobs in hospitals and in libraries and in restaurants. These are people who we care a lot about and who many of us have, different types of relationships with. And we recognize that when their rights to due process are undermined, that is a threat to all of us.
But how is it then, and because your background is ethics, these are fun questions to ask you, but like if the price, in the Biden administration, the price of eggs went up or the price of milk went up, that was like, that killed them, right? I mean, that's a huge thing because that affects everybody every day, price of gas, for one thing, which just reading about that, how it's really helping President Trump because whatever reason, gas prices going down, blah, blah, blah. So why, but the immigrant situation I know there are people protesting, we have people down here every Wednesday, but it still hasn't reached the regular people that they don't worry about that as much as the price of eggs or the price of milk. Why is that?
I think people are getting worried about it. I mean, when I'm in Market Basket and I see that like the fruit is not really stocked on the shelves a lot of days anymore, that's because of the people who pick their fruit. Those are migrant workers who aren't able to go to work either because they're scared of being picked up by ICE or because, you know, like their business has been shut down or they've been moved elsewhere. And I think that, you know, we're already starting to see the ways in which the deportations are scaring students out of going to schools, right? Scaring families out of going to work. And immigrants aren't just people doing like low-level jobs. They're people working at all levels of our economy, right? You don't want to go to the hospital and have no nurses or no doctors because they're afraid to go to work because someone in their family was taken or whatnot. And so I think that once we recognize the ways in which we're all connected, we will be able to fight back together and ensure that we can create a democracy that really does function for all of us. So the ethical question is like, how do we realize that we're all related, right? That these things affect all of us.
Fair enough. I mean, Chris Pappas actually split with Jeanne Shaheen on support for armaments to Israel. He voted to continue the armaments, and she voted to stop them. Where do you stand? How would you have voted?
I think that, you know, it's a tricky question in some ways because I won't be in office until 2027. And just given how much has changed in the last 2 years, I don't know where the situation will be 2 years from now. But what I would say is that I have a lot of hesitation about continuing to just send offensive arms to Israel at this point in time. The situation in Gaza is an absolute crisis.
But you had to vote. I mean, if you literally had to vote like Chris did.
Yeah, I would vote like he did.
To
I mean, I would vote against.
You would vote with Jeanne
I would vote with
Shaheen.
Jeanne Shaheen. I mean, they voted in different houses, but yeah.
And the anti-Semitism, I mean, you're at Harvard, so can you just talk about that? Like, and what, you know, I mean, we know that there was basically a deal struck between the administration and Harvard paid whatever zillions of dollars. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, my 2 cents is worth not much at Harvard in terms of what the administration does. But what I will say is that in the classroom after October 7th, I saw my students really retreating inward and being afraid to express themselves and to express the hurt that they were feeling about what was happening and the hurt that they were feeling about how other students were responding to them. I think that, you know, historically, anti-Semitism has been a problem at Harvard. There were a number of years where there was a quota on the number of Jewish students who were admitted to the university. And I think that it's really important that, you know, teachers are able to listen to all of their students and to provide a space in the classroom where people can learn how to have these types of hard conversations and express how what's happening in one place is affecting people in another place. And also manage to not walk away from those conversations, but come back even when they're hard. So what I would say about what's going on right now is that I don't honestly believe that this is a good faith effort to combat anti-Semitism at Harvard. I think Harvard has been taking a lot of steps towards combating anti-Semitism and also combating anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian bias, both of which are a problem at the university. And I also think that the federal government's attack on Harvard is part of a broader attack on education around this country. And we're seeing it even in places like New Hampshire with the underfunding of our public schools and the scam to give vouchers to people who already have their kids in private schools, right? Schools that are able to discriminate against certain types of students, either because of their abilities or because of their teachers' beliefs. And I think that I would love to see that kind of money going back into our public schools. And I would like to see us making the connection between what's happening at Harvard and what's happening across the country. Our education system is what enables our democracy to be strong. It is where we learn how to talk to people who are different from us. It's where we learn how to get together as a country and do incredible things. And when Trump attacks a place like Harvard, right, he's attacking our entire education system.
You had touched on the vouchers in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So the vouchers, in just this past legislative session, they basically allowed to unlimited salaries and income, and you'd qualify for the $5,600 voucher to send your child to a private school or religious school. And it's very controversial, and it's going to cost the state, I think they're estimating $50 million this year. And, you know, a lot of people are for, obviously the conservatives are for it, a lot of conservatives are against it because there's no control over that money, it just goes out the window.
Absolutely.
So when people complain to me about it, and I say, well, sure, but how did we get to this spot?
Absolutely.
I mean, why is it there's such a reaction that we have a voucher system? Why there are so many private schools cropping up and charter schools, which to me is a reflection on what's happening with the public schools. So how much is it that, in your view, hey, there's a real problem in the public schools that need to be fixed, or how much is it really, it's their problem and they're taking our money?
Yeah, I mean, we do see, like, evidence shows us that there are that there are private schools and charter schools and religious schools that pop up in places where voucher programs are instituted to kind of vacuum up that money. We also know that private schools raise their cost of tuition in accordance with the vouchers, so it isn't actually really defraying the cost of going to school at places like that. I would say that I understand your point, right? There are a lot of people who think to themselves, like, my school is underfunded. I don't want my kids to have to go here. I want them to go to the place that, you know, is in our best interest for a family. And I can appreciate like the short-term vision there, right? Taking care of your own kids. But I also think that as a state, we really need to think about how we fund public education. We do a horrible job of it. New Hampshire is literally the worst in the nation at funding public education. And this isn't just at the K through 12 level, it's also our higher education. Our students are graduating from UNH with the highest student loan debt in the country. And as a result, they're not able to stay here and afford to work here and to build their families here. And so they have to leave, and they just don't have the same opportunities that I do. And I wish that, you know, we have a conversation, like a serious conversation as a state about sources of revenue and how we're going to pay for our public schools. Because what I saw in the last legislative session was us taking $30 million that was supposed to go for special education and putting that into a bucket for vouchers. And the special education services still have to be provided and paid for. And so the question for me as a local government official is, where does that money come from? And the answer is our taxpayers, right? This is putting the local governments in the position of having to continue to raise taxes because the federal and state governments aren't being responsible when it comes to supporting our public school system.
Right, but you're saying that's sort of a revenue debate or a position, but I'm talking about the schools themselves. I mean, there's a reason why people are upset with the public school systems. I mean, even our school, our system here, our budget's like $40 million. And whether it comes from local property taxes, which it does, most of it, or the state or federal, many people, which is why the budget wasn't approved last year, think it's just too much money. When they look at it, they can look at the administration and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Like, are those legitimate concerns in your view? And obviously you don't know about the Conway system.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I understand that there are concerns about how much it costs. And again, this is because the state government and the federal government aren't paying what they're legally obligated to in order to support these schools. So as a result, we all kind of exist on our own little islands, and we have to like kind of vacuum up all the resources and throw them back into our schools because there's a lot of fixed costs that come with educating kids in 2025. And this is a place where I think that, you know, we really do need to think as a state and as a country about how we're investing in our kids, right? New Hampshire spends more per capita on students than almost anywhere else in the entire country. And part of that is just because of how little we spend as a state. So what I would say to the people in Conway is, like, I get it. I think that we have heated debates over like what the value is, right? What the cost is for certain things. But again, if we had IDEA funded, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that would take down the price of educating the students and it would lower people's property taxes. If we had healthcare for everyone in this country, it means that school systems and local property taxpayers wouldn't be on the hook for paying all of those medical costs for teachers. And those are two of the three biggest expenses for public schools around the country. And those are places where federal policy could make a big difference in our pocketbooks.
So, but what you're saying though is that the answer is more money, regardless of where it comes from, not a reform of the current public school systems.
I mean, in terms of like building costs, I would say that that would have to be on like a per district basis. I wouldn't say that there's certain costs that we could make across the board everywhere in this country that would be appropriate for every school district or even across the state of New Hampshire, right? Some school districts have, because of their local property tax system, a lot more funding to put into those schools. Some places have like these amazing theaters and these fancy turf fields and these night lights that they can play football games under. And other schools don't even have like new desks or new textbooks. And so I don't think that the way to think about this conversation has to begin with like cutting things across the board, but really like what is the value of education, and you know, how can we invest in our students in a way that maybe we don't have to keep paying for things year after year. Maybe if we put solar panels on the roofs, we wouldn't have such high utility bills at the school districts, for example.
Okay, so now the Democrats are trying to reinvent themselves basically after the, I mean, New Hampshire's basically, except for the federal delegation, which is kind of an interesting story in itself.
Yeah.
Our federal delegation is Democratic and everybody else is Republican. So, and when people complain, this is my thing, is when people complain to me about Trump, I say, okay, look at your side. There's a reason why Trump was elected. It wasn't just because of Trump, it was because what the Democrats did or didn't do. So when you look back, what mistakes do you think the Democrats have done? But more importantly, what do you think the message should be going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in terms of reinvention, the Democratic Party is the oldest political party in the United States. It's been here since before the country was founded. And there have been a lot of times when the Democrats just haven't had their act together. In the 1800s, the Democrats were the party that supported slavery, right? In the early 20th century, the Democrats weren't the party of workers' rights. And they have had to take a long, hard look at themselves and say, okay, who are we for in this country? And this is another opportunity for them to do it. Are Democrats the party that is for, parents who are struggling under the exorbitant cost of childcare? Are they the family of teachers and of union workers? Are they the family of grandparents who are taking care of their grandkids, people who are sick, people who are immigrants to this country? My answer to that is yes, right? The Democrats and me as a Democrat are running to represent the people who do not feel like their voices have mattered. I am running because I feel like my voice, the voices of my students and my neighbors, and the people who live in my community and communities like mine, they haven't mattered. And so that's why I'm going around this district and I'm asking people, what do you wish that politicians understood better about your experiences?
What are you hearing when you talk to people?
I'm hearing a lot of people who say a politician has never asked me that question before. And that's a really striking fact in a place like New Hampshire, where pretty much everyone has met everyone who's run for president in the last, since the 1960s when we had our First in the Nation primary started. It's a startling question for people who do have such good constituent services and personal connections with their representatives. And it makes me think that there's a lot that we can learn from the people who live here. And I think that good leadership is going to begin with listening and learning from the people who do.
Okay, I'm sorry. And then you do have to get through the primary.
Yeah.
And so how are you going to position yourself specifically against Maura and Stephanie?
I mean, I think that Maura and Stephanie are great candidates. They are both coming from the Democratic establishment, and I think that there's a lot of people who are going to be really excited about that. And I'm somebody who's coming from a local government perspective. I am a mom who understands just how hard it is to, get your kids to daycare and to the bus stop in the morning and then go to work and then come home and provide for them. I'm someone who knows what it's like to work multiple jobs and to spend hours on the phone with the health insurance company, asking them to please cover your kid's strep test, asking your daycare provider to stay open 5 extra minutes because you're going to be late. I'm someone who knows that it costs $8.50 to do a load of laundry at the laundromat in Route 1 down in Hampton, which is more than our federal and state minimum wage because I've been there. And so I think that the people of this district and me have the opportunity to put someone like them down in Washington. And I think if we want things to be different in this country, if we want things to be different in this district, we need to start putting different people in power.
Carleigh, I think that's a very good introduction.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure it's people are watching this saying, wait a minute, is there an election this fall? No, it's next year.
You got a whole year.
You got a whole year, so we'll be seeing you again.
Yeah.
So good luck. It's nice to meet you.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.